and welcome to National Disability Radio. I am here today with two wonderful people who are about to introduce themselves. I am Alden Blevins, Communications Manager here at NDRN. I have my own lived experience with disability, and I'm really glad to be here today. What about you guys? Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm Stephanie Flynt McEben. I am also one of your hosts of the podcast and NDRN's Public Policy Analyst, and I have beef with a music streaming app, and I'm not going to talk about which one, but let's just say that this music streaming app told me that it was 67 for Christmas this year, and then it had the audacity to, oh gosh, what was the playlist the other morning that was recommended? It was like Old Camping Man Sunday Morning, and it was really weird. Like, why? I don't listen to Old Camping Man music unless James Taylor and Chappell, Roan and Taylor Swift count as that. But anyway, hope everybody else is having a good day. And hey, if Spotify thinks you're old, you're I don't know, you're young at heart. Anyway.
You know, I think it clocked my age exactly. And I must say that I listened to a lot of Lady Gaga and Kesha in the last year.
Yes.
And to be fair,
2010s era.
They were still the two most popular artists, like when I was graduating from high school. Yes. So they clocked me. They clocked me for sure.
Oh my gosh. Time to introduce Eric, who is our Deputy Executive.Director for Public Policy. How are you doing? It's great for you to be here.
Great. It's wonderful to be here. Evidently, your phone must be listening to my music then, and that's why it thinks that you're that
age. Maybe so. I don't know what's going on, but I don't know how I feel about it. And also, I guess the Spotify age thing is eclectic, because my top artist was Taylor Swift, so I don't know. Anywho.
So, I'm Eric Buehlmann. I'm the Deputy Executive.Director for Public Policy. As Stephanie said, my first choice is not Taylor Swift, but my wife listens to it a lot, so when I'm in the car with her, that's what I'm listening to.
This is National Disability Radio. We are the official podcast of the National Disability Rights Network. The National Disability Rights Network works in Washington, D.C. and around the country on behalf of the protection and advocacy systems, the P&As, and the client assistance programs, or CAP. We are the nation's largest provider of legal advocacy services for people with disabilities. So the first thing we want to talk about is some big and good news. The P&A network was funded for the rest of FY26. Can we get like a hallelujah? So the first thing I was just going to ask is, Eric, can you explain to us why it's a big deal that we were funded and level funded, and kind of what it took for us to get to this point?
In terms of being able to, why we were able to do this, it's really our members. Reaching out to all the representatives, all the senators, making the case, all the good work that the P&As and the CAPs do, and showing all the examples and saying, look, if you don't fund us, this is what's going to happen, is that person with a disability is not going to be able to get accessible housing or accessible transportation, or the student's going to be able to go to school, or someone's going to have an assistive technology device, or rampant abuse and neglect are going to be occurring in either the community or institutions. So they made those cases. Congress said, we agree with you, and the best we could hope for at this time was at least maintaining our funding and not losing it.
I think it's really important to remember that this is not just numbers on a spreadsheet. This has real world impacts on people's lives, the lives of people with disabilities, whether or not they can access enforcement of their civil rights. So super important.
Absolutely.
Just to peel back the curtain and give a little more context for some of our listeners, I just want to go ahead and ask the kind of general question of, what are federal appropriations, and what does that really mean when we talk about them?
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to jump in a little bit here. So essentially what federal appropriations are is how Congress allocates funding. And so essentially there is a long process, as Eric kind of talked through a little bit earlier, in terms of, everything that's been going on with the budget. And so individuals are able to make various appropriations requests to their office. But essentially, in a nutshell, it's essentially just how we get the funds that we need in order to do the work that we do.
And just kind of practically, what are the steps in an appropriations process, or what can people kind of expect out of appropriation season?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so usually, of course, in the spring, we usually see a big influx of appropriations forms, which we're starting to kind of see that now with the House setting their committee deadlines for appropriations. So we're starting to kind of see an influx of that now. In the Senate, we'll probably see that a little bit later on as that comes down. But usually the offices will set their personal deadlines, their committee deadlines, and then the appropriations bills, just kind of depending on where they sit, which all of ours sit on the subcommittee for Labor, Health and Human Services, Education and related agencies on both the House and the Senate side on the Appropriations Committee. And so there will be a House markup usually around June, as well as, a Senate markup in July, with the hope that we are able to go ahead and pass the appropriations, the funding that we need for the next fiscal year that starts on October 1st.
So my next one is just, why do you guys think advocacy on Capitol Hill matters during appropriation season? The regular person might not realize how important this is and why.
Yeah, so in my experience, like you said, Alden, a lot of people don't realize how important and how crucial that kind of advocacy is. But really and truly, that kind of advocacy is what helps us acquire our funding for services, particularly advocacy. So it's definitely super important to be continuing to follow up with your members, of course, meeting with your members if you can and their staff, having a steady contact in their offices, things like that. And even just building those relationships, in my viewpoint, is a good form of advocacy, and just making sure that they know who you are, they know what your programs do, they know how it benefits, folks in their state / district, et cetera, the constituency that they serve. So, just making sure that, those points.
And the biggest requirement is staff are always seeking information. Mm-hmm. You're covering hundreds of programs, multiple issues. They don't know everything that is going on. They can't track everything at the same time because they just have information overload. So putting a face with a person, with the story, with the request in front of them makes the biggest difference, because then the staff begins to know who you are. Yes. But otherwise, they're just overloaded with how much material they're trying to cover and how much stuff they're trying to do. And if you're not in front of them, as it's basically said, if you're not talking to them, you're on the menu, you're not the one that's providing them the information.
Yeah. You're not at the table, you're on the menu. Yep. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I was also just going to ask, we're all so excited and grateful that we were level funded for FY26, but what does level funding really mean? What has that, looked like over the last couple years? And having that level or that stagnant funding, what does that mean in terms of the P&As services or the, take-home impact?
It's difficult for the P&As because level funding really is in a way a kind of a cut. Costs are going up continually. Healthcare costs are going up. Cost of travel, cost of everything is going up. So level funding ultimately means that they're able to do less. Or they may need to shift from doing as much individual casework to more systemic work, where you're helping multiple people by solving one problem. So level funding is great, especially when you're facing the potential of cuts, but ultimately if you do that for many, many years, it ultimately means that the P&As and the CAPs will have less staff and able to serve less people.
So now that we've kind of grounded ourselves in a little bit of how this process works, we're going to talk about the larger policy landscape that we're all living in right now. So what are some of the disability policy concerns we saw come to a head in 2025, and how do we think that might influence our policy landscape for the rest of 2026?
Oh my goodness. Do you want to start or do you want me to?
You go first.
Oh goodness. So I think for me, the biggest thing that comes to mind is the dismantling of the Department of Education. We've definitely, seen different things that have kind of gone ahead in that regard. And so obviously there's a lot of different concerns that are there in those types of things. And so just continuing to monitor that and what all of that looks like. Of course, I'll leave a little bit of the healthcare stuff to Eric since that's more of his specialty. But of course, that is something that I would be remiss not to mention, the various concerns around the Medicaid work requirements that will be taking effect and how that's going to impact our community. So there are definitely a lot of different policies and a lot of different things that you don't think about necessarily intersecting with the disability community, but that are still having impacts on the disability community, particularly those who are members of multiple marginalized communities.
And I think building on that for Stephanie is, it's not just the Medicaid work requirements that are going to hit people, it's just the massive amounts of cuts to the amount of funding that the states are getting. It's sort of a partnership between states and the federal government. And if the federal government cuts their share of funding, it means states are going to be cutting their share of funding. And what those cuts really mean in the long run is that, unfortunately, not required services or waiver services are going to be the ones that are going to get hit. If they have to do it, the state will pay for it. If they don't have to do it and the state's not willing to put up the money, then those services are going to go away. And in our case, that means home and community-based services for the most part. So not only are a number of people going to get kicked off of Medicaid because they're having problems following the work requirements or being, understanding what the work requirements are, and or having to go through, getting recertified every 6 months rather than every year, that's going to mean more people are going to be kicked off. On top of it, you add in all the cuts, and the states are going to look around and say, well, we're losing $1 billion, let's say, in California, I think is the number they said. How are we going to make up that gap? And what they're going to do is they're going to say, well, these are required, and required in the Medicaid program is institutionalized care versus the ones that we choose to do on our own, which is home and community-based services. Well, if we have to do it, we'll have to pay for it. And that means there's a gap, and that gap is going to come out of home and community-based services.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of a great connection to that home and community-based services piece. I was going to kind of ask, generally speaking, what themes might we be seeing in Congress right now that could affect P&A programs or disability justice as a whole?
I do think one issue that we're encountering is more and more members that may not understand disability as well, or what the desires of people with disabilities are, and may listen to not just the person with the disability. They may be listening to their guardians, or they may be listening to their parents. Not saying that they don't know what the person with a disability wants, but if you want to go to the source is the person with a disability. So I think one of the themes, and I think this is why it's critically important for people with disabilities to be involved in these discussions and doing this advocacy, is you've got to put yourself front and center. And you have to say, this is what I desire, this is what I want. I want to live in the community, I want to live at home. I want to be able to work in an integrated environment. I don't want to be paid sub-minimum wage. And if they're not hearing from people with disabilities about that, then that's a problem. And I think what we're seeing is sort of a return to sort of the old way of thinking, sort of pre-IDEA, pre-ADA. And people with disabilities should be off to the side and not at the forefront. And so I think that theme is carrying over in a lot of the ways Congress and the administration are looking at these issues. I think in terms of other themes, it's we got to save money somewhere. And their ideas of trying to save money is to cut programs, which actually in the long run cost more. It costs more to be served in an institution than it costs to live and get served in the community. And so we've really got to be making those cases. But so I think those are two themes that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that another theme really is just broader justice in the civil rights community, just not completely and fully understanding disability. And so I definitely think that, if we're not careful with everything going on in this administration and in this Congress, like we definitely could regress back a little bit more into the medical model as opposed to the social model. And I think that some of the demonstration in the legislation that, could potentially be introduced, and of course that we are closely monitoring and making sure that we're continually keeping an eye out, and of course we'll keep folks in the network apprised of those things. But all that to say, I think that's kind of like a demonstrated action when it comes to like their understanding of what disability is.
I love what you guys said, especially about, people with disabilities being front and center and telling their own stories and telling the world what they really want and, seek out in their lives. I think that that's so important for people with disabilities to be in the driver's seat. For those of you who don't know, we do have a saying in the disability community that is nothing about us without us. So kind of speaking about some of the messages that have been happening in the last year, we know that a lot of things have become very polarized throughout the last year, 2025. What opportunities do you guys see for collaboration towards a better future for people with disabilities? What efforts might be a good target for bipartisan support?
Yeah, so I think for me, definitely always on the hunt for bipartisan opportunity, because the truth of the matter is that disability, even though it is being portrayed as a partisan issue, it's not a partisan issue. It's a nonpartisan issue. And so, just kind of keeping that in mind as we continue to do this policy work. I think what it boils down to really, at least a part of it, is messaging. Because it's, looking at the issues that are in the disability community, because they're nonpartisan, I think that really it comes down to, it's not about what you're saying, it's how you're saying it, it's how you're presenting it. When we're talking to, different offices, we want to emphasize different things that they are most concerned about, or that, may matter most to their particular constituency, or, the folks with disabilities that they may serve. So those would be my things, but I definitely, even though it can be challenging at times, definitely just continuing to keep hope there.
I mean, there's always a lot of different things, and as Stephanie said, you have to sort of tailor your message around what people are interested in. So, things like the Transformation to Competitive Integrated Employment Act, I think there's a large number of people, and we've seen it in the states, they're phasing out the sub-minimum wage, even in some very conservative states. And so that's something that's garnered bipartisan support, that people should be paid at least the minimum wage for the work they're doing, and that they should be integrated into the employment environment and not just in segregated workshops. So we were able to get a Republican co-sponsor for the Keeping All Students Safe Act this year, which would place some kind of federal restrictions on the use of restraint and seclusion in schools, and provide money for training, which is critically important, so that the teachers know and the school personnel know what they do when they're encountering tough situations. There's a number of bills. Ultimately, disability is very bipartisan, and it impacts everybody. So usually, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or independent, you either have a family member or know someone very close to you that has a disability. So you just got to frame the message right.
I love that you guys both mentioned messaging and disability being, affecting everyone. That's part of my core messaging that I always try to put out there, is that, disability can come for anybody. You can be, a person who has no disabilities one morning, and your situation could be different by that evening, depending on what happens to you in your life. And even as you age throughout the lifespan, most of us are going to experience some degree of disability in our lives. So advocating for this community now, when you have the chance to, is only going to benefit you when you inevitably become a part of it. So I think that's really important to remember. My kind of last question on this topic is just, what do you think you would want policymakers today to know most about our programs at the P&As?
I'm going to yield to the executive overseer to start.
So, I think we are sort of our members are hidden gems. I think that's the biggest thing, is that most people don't know what a protection and advocacy agency is and or what it does. As I've said many a times in my stories, is that I had met the executive director of the Vermont P&A for many times when I worked up on the Hill. Had no idea he worked for the Protection and Advocacy Agency. Talked to him about housing, talked to him about employment, talked to him about all these different things. Had no idea that there was a Protection and Advocacy Agency. My second day at the job, I go into an NDRN board meeting, and there he is sitting there, and I'm like, oh, that's what a Protection and Advocacy Agency is. Because I didn't have a clue. So I think we're sort of a hidden gem. And I think really the big thing is that the P&As do a lot of work that other agencies can't. We have these really strong, I hate saying we, but our members have strong authorities to go in and investigate and monitor for abuse and neglect. If that's going on, they can go in unannounced. They could do these kinds of investigations that other places can't. There are story after story of the police being kept out of certain places, or child protective services, or adult protective services. But the P&A goes in and is able to sort of expose that abuse and neglect. And that's really the important thing. And I think people just need to know they exist. But there's more than just the systemic work. Individually, they are helping people around employment or education or accessible transportation and housing. So I just think there are ultimately hidden gems, and that the more you delve into it, and as you said, Alden, everyone's going to become, in my opinion, a member of the disability community at one time in their life or not. Could be permanently, could be temporarily if you break your leg or something like that. And now all of a sudden you begin to realize that, yeah, curb cuts do make a heck of a lot of sense. And yes, automatic doors are very helpful, and all those kinds of things. And so we just need to do a better job of sort of explaining the beauty of the work the P&As do, and that it's not just these giant exposés of abuse and neglect, but there's all the little individual work that they do that's extremely important to families and people with disabilities.
We know in this world that policy is never static. There's always a lot coming at us, coming at you guys, to kind of figure out and think about how it impacts our community. So my next question is just, what do we think might be coming in the landscape of 2026? You know, it's hard to speculate, but what should we be looking ahead towards as a community?
Election years are always a weird little duck.
Yes.
Partly because Congress does not stay around that much. They like to go home and they like to campaign. Some would say they're not here to do as much damage. But the administration's still here. They can do plenty of damage. And so, I mean, my expectation is there will not be a lot that's going to really occur. They're going to do what they normally have to do, which is sort of the appropriations, and try to get that done as well as they can before the elections. There may be some messaging bills that they try to work on, but I'm not expecting a lot of things to actually get passed and a lot of work to get done. But I think this gets back to the theme issue and that kind of discussion, which is you need to be laying the foundation for the members that are here now and those that are running, especially in a seat where a member's retiring or if there's an open seat. And you need to be making sure the candidates understand the needs and desires and wishes of people with disabilities, so that when they do come here, they already have at least some base foundation. So I would really look at 26 as, you got to focus on funding, because that's going to have to happen no matter what, and then making sure that your candidates and then making sure that your members of Congress understand about disability, so that when they come back next year, that they're really almost ready to get going on the issues of importance.
Yeah. So much of what we do is, kind of playing a little bit of defense about whatever is going on in the larger policy landscape or the news cycle, of that week. But we obviously also have our own policy priorities that we would like to see and that we would like movement on in the next year. So I was just going to ask, what are NDRN's top 3 public policy priorities?
I think if you're looking in the proactive world, that's tough in this day and age.
Yeah.
I think our policy priorities tend to be much more in the defensive world now.
Yeah.
Which is, there's sort of a 1A and a 1B. You always have the money aspect of it, the appropriations aspect of it, and making sure that our members have hopefully increased funding, but at least level funding. The second, as I talked about before, is our members have amazingly strong authorities to sort of ferret out abuse, neglect, fraud, and waste. And we got to make sure that those aren't reduced. And so that's sort of the other big thing. I think structurally we're looking at the administration and saying we need to make sure that disability is still centered here. The Department of Education is extremely important for students with disabilities and the amount of work they do, and around employment, because the vocational rehabilitation system is there. Health and Human Services impacts people with disabilities in huge, humongous ways. And so we got to make sure that those structures stay strong, that are providing the training, the technical assistance, the support to all the different programs that support people with disabilities, and that they're strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard education, I heard healthcare. I think these are all bread and butter issues for us and for the community at large. It can just be tricky to decide when and where to focus your attention.
Right. And also too, again, going back to that, what are, how do we mesh the priorities in a way that we could potentially try to work with folks and get stuff done? And I think that that's kind of where that point of collaboration comes in, figuring out what the priorities of various offices are and see, how can we kind of mesh ours together? Where's the common ground? What can we work together on in order to, make things better for disabled folks?
And I think, as Stephanie said, this is where these relationships come into effect, because you have no idea what's going to be the big issue of the day. Mm-hmm. Today it may be X, tomorrow it's going to be Y, the day after it's going to be Z, and the staff are just overwhelmed a little bit. But if you have those relationships with them, if something comes up and you need to get in touch with them, you shoot them that email, you send them that note, and they know who you are, and they're willing to look and listen to figure out what you're saying and where it needs to fit in their priorities. If they don't know who you are, this gets back to if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, then they're not going to understand why this is a problem, because you've not laid that foundation. So that's where those relationships come to be critically important, because you just never know what's going to pop up.
My next question is, what are kind of the strategies or things that everyday folks can do to kind of help or support? There's a lot of overwhelming information coming at folks on all sides, and it would just be really nice if we could know what would be most helpful in terms of getting that community support to advance our priorities.
I think for me, the biggest thing that I can think of there is just making sure that your voice is being heard, and that you are able to kind of, amplify your voice when it comes to these issues, making sure that you are reaching out to your senators and representative, things of that nature. Of course, there's the number for the Capitol Switchboard, and we can certainly put that in the show notes if that's helpful to people. But for everyday folks, it's so interesting. I'll be on Facebook and I'll just see different things, and it'll be videos of people just calling their senators and representative, and it sounds scary, it sounds daunting, but I promise you, getting constituent calls is definitely something that is super, super helpful in terms of advocacy there. So definitely recommend that.
And as Stephanie said, take advantage of those action alerts, take advantage of those days. If you're looking at your state and local legislatures, a lot of them have disability days where a number of groups will come together and they'll go to the Capitol and they'll talk up their issues. Take advantage of those. In terms of the federal, try to keep track of if they're going to do a town hall or if they're going to be having a get-together, and go and have a discussion with the staff and the members that are there. And then when it comes to the campaigns, get involved with the campaigns. Make sure that the candidates have some kind of disability platform as part of their work and what they're doing. So, because ultimately, if you've, I'm going to say trained them ahead of time, then when they come to Congress or they go into the state legislature, you don't have to explain as much. Mm-hmm. You're not having to spend your time explaining why this issue is important. You get to jump to, this is why we need to do this. So you need to be working at those candidates. You need to be looking at their platforms, and you need to be talking to them so that they know that you're there.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times people feel overwhelmed with just knowing how or why to help. And I love that you even mentioned people posting their calls onto social media, because I think that's another avenue that folks can use, right? Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to people that you talk with online about how these issues impact you and your life personally. I think that hearing those stories from people with disabilities can be really impactful as well. All right, I've got some quicker round of questions just to kind of help folks get to know both you guys and your work.
Yay!
The first one is just, almost similar to like two truths and a lie. If you could give me one myth and one truth about federal advocacy, what would you say?
I think it's sort of the flip side of the same coin. To me, the myth that's out there is my voice doesn't matter, and that whatever I say isn't going to be heard by the staff, isn't going to be heard by the member, and I'm not going to really have an impact. It does. again, as I said early on, staff are constantly looking for those sources of information. They cannot keep track of all the topics they cover, all the bills they have to do, all the different appropriations they're following. They can't. They rely on the constituents to provide them information. And if you are a trusted resource and providing them good information, you've got your in, and they'll understand and they'll follow what you're asking them to do as best they can. So I think that's the myth, is that their voice doesn't make any difference. So to me, the flip side of that is the truth is it does make a difference. And so if you're not engaged, then you're automatically losing. The disability community needs to be and put itself front and center. Because as Alden said, people with disabilities are a majority of this country. You will eventually be a member of the disability community. And so therefore, you need to make sure your voice is heard. And so I think the truth is your voice does matter. The myth is people think that it doesn't.
I think for me, a myth that I would say, not as interesting as Eric's, but I think a myth that I would say, and these are probably like for people who are kind of newer, just more on the outskirts of things, is that a bill is going to pass overnight. That's not how policy works. Usually it takes lots of reiterations of introduction and stuff, but that's how it's designed. And so I think that's kind of where my truth comes in, or where the truth comes in for the myth versus truth, is that, policy is designed to take a while, even though it can be frustrating at times, but that's in order to ensure the appropriate checks and balances and whatnot. So no, you're not gonna enter in and pass the bill in 2 days. Hate to break into any hopefuls, but No,
that is a huge one. That is, people think that policy moves at a lightning quick pace. It is a snail.
Yeah.
It takes years. I worked 8 years on election reform before we were finally able to get it through Congress. And, reauthorizations. This is one of our smaller ones. The Assistive Technology Act program was last reauthorized in 2004. We finally got the next reauthorization done in 2021. So it moves slowly, and so I guess that's another thing, sort of following up on what you're saying. The truth is, you have to stick to these people.
Yes.
You can't just say, I talked about this once and it's going to get done this year. No, you're probably back next year.
Not how it
and
works.
You're probably back the next Congress.
Yeah.
And you're probably back the next Congress. So you will repeatedly have the same conversations.
Yes. Especially with staff turnover too. There are going to be different staff members. Folks move on to, may move back to the representative or the senator's districts, or their, own home districts, or, change roles, what have you. But there can sometimes be a lot of that turnover. But that can also be a good thing too.
But Stephanie, I think we've got another good truth and myth.
Oh,
which
okay.
is, the myth in my mind is, if I feel like the member's not supportive or following what I'm talking about and caring about disability, that it's not worth my time. The truth is, staff do a lot of work.
Yes.
And you may encounter a member that is not really interested in disability, doesn't really care about disability, but the staff is very interested in disability. And so your message can get conveyed from the staff to the member. You may not always get everything exactly the way you wanted from the member, but you've moved them in a direction, or her, in a direction that they weren't going to go without the staff.
Exactly. Staff definitely have a lot of influence when it comes to different member priorities and things like that might not usually be on their radar, such as disability.
I caught Eric saying something yesterday that I thought was so impactful. Somebody was expressing disappointment that their meeting was with a baby staffer.
Oh.
And I heard Eric say that baby staffer could be in charge in 10 years.
I was gonna say, like, a chief of staff in 5 years.
Yeah, you never know what inroads you're making
Yeah.
when you get into those rooms, and you should take the chance once you're in that room
So
to make
true.
the case for people with disabilities.
Yes.
This next one, I'm hearing a lot of themes of perseverance, maybe, having to stay on people, having to return year to year. So this is just a silly question, but what is your Hill Day fuel of choice? Is it coffee? Is it tea? What keeps you going?
I think that mine is probably Celsius, and then I don't know if y'all ever had the Mary's Gone crackers, but I like to have little hummus things with me, and so I'll do the Mary's Gone crackers with some hummus on the hill, and so that's really good to eat between meetings and stuff. But they're really good. They're quinoa seed crackers, gluten-free, garlicky basil. I don't know, they're really good. especially with hummus. So I guess for me, that's like my food and caffeine.
And Stephanie, no doubt, can tell everybody what mine is.
Anything gluten-free / unsweetened iced tea from
Yep,
McDonald's.
bingo. I have never had coffee in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, I've never had coffee
I
in my
thought
life.
you would at least.
Nope,
Oh my
never had
gosh.
coffee in my life.
Just like not even curious.
I'm curious, but I've never had it. I've now reached the age of why should I now start it?
This is so fair because
That is
once
fair.
you start, it's hard to
You're not
stop.
gonna be able to stop.
It's
yeah.
real hard to stop.
Especially when you find like a roast that you really like.
I'm a caffeine addict, don't get me wrong. For many years, it was Dr. Pepper Diet Coke.
Diet Coke.
Doctor said no. So now I'm an unsweetened tea. Well, I'm not going to say always unsweetened tea, but it's always usually some form of iced tea.
Yeah, and sometimes you sneak in the sweet tea as a treat, I assume.
No, not really. I'm not a big
Okay.
fan of sweet tea. I find it too sweet.
You have to have the
Wow.
right sweet tea though. Like this, they
Yeah,
can't
I'm not from
make,
the South.
I was gonna say
I'm in Virginia, but I'm not the South.
they don't make good sweet tea up in the DMV. If you want good sweet, actually, they just started carrying Milos at my local grocery store. So
I've
that is
seen
what I
Milo's.
recommend.
Milo's is good?
I
Okay.
love Milos.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll have to get that one.
So good. Yeah, it's sweet, but it's not too sweet. Anyway.
See, I find it too sweet. I'll mix it with unsweetened iced tea at times. Like, I brew my tea at home.
Oh, yeah.
And what I'll do is I'll pour a little lemon iced tea in
Yeah.
and sort of mix it.
Okay.
But I
Some
find it
sense.
too sweet.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've never had coffee in my life. Coffee ice cream once or twice, but never.
Okay, but that's really good.
Nah, no.
No.
No. Coffee smells great. I love the smell of coffee,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not going to try it now if I can avoid it.
Ah!
Good for you. So my next one is just, what is your go-to story when speaking with folks on the Hill? Like, do you have a P&A story that you feel like you come back to? Do you speak about issues more generally, or do you have a go-to story in your back pocket?
Well, I mean, I think the one I always fall back on is the Kaufman House in Kansas. There was a place in Kansas, I think if you just Google Kaufman House in Kansas, you'll find it. Basically, this is one of those examples where the P&A was the only one that got in. These were a husband and wife that were running I guess I'd call it a group home, that were doing unspeakably horrible abuse and neglect of people with mental illness. And the state had been called in a number of times, the local people had been called in a number of times, and they just shut the door on them. The P&A went in and exposed the whole thing, basically showing what was going on there. They got convicted of a number of crimes, they were sent away to jail. To me, that's the example that I will go to a lot, is without the P&A, these people would have been just still going through abuse and neglect. I mean, I think the P&As are creating stories every single day, honestly. The number of reports that come out from P&As, we just got one from the Minnesota P&A about the use of seclusion, with some amazing pictures of the various seclusion rooms in Minnesota that they had come upon. You know, I think they're occurring every single day, and all these reports that are coming out, our members are in all sorts of facilities just exposing abuse and neglect. You know, unfortunately, some of the stuff we really can't talk about is they're exposing, you know, the waste, fraud, and abuse that's occurring at times in the representative payee program, because people aren't using the benefits to the benefit of people with disabilities, to the beneficiaries. And so, but the one, if you were going to ask me, the one, it would be the Kaufman House. And Nancy Jensen testified in front of Congress on the importance of the P&A program. She's written some books on the issues that arose, but that would be the one go-to.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it really just varies from office to office and, you know, various priorities. I will say that, you know, one thing I do try to do before meeting with particular offices is I try to reach out to the P&A just to see if there are any particular stories or any particular things that I should highlight going on in their state for their senators or representative, or even if there's anything specific in their district. Eric brought up the report that Minnesota did on restraint and seclusion, and one thing that staffers love is data. So if you're able to kind of bring in a visual, say like the report, or even send in like a report of what's been going on along with a story, along with data, that's really going to get you far. And so that those are things that I really try to bring, just tangible stuff that they can take back, to their higher ups in order to try to get different things up the chain in order for us to get, the support that we're wanting to get from that particular office, whether the goal is, co-sponsoring a particular bill or sponsoring something, or whether the goal is just general support or flagging something, just making sure that you have those materials that folks can take back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what Eric said about the network generating stories all of the time, every day,
yes.
Where I sit working in communications is I try to share a story at least, every week. There's a new news story coming out about something that a P&A is doing, whether it be work related to abuse and neglect, whether it be work related to some states. They're already talking about the Medicaid waiver programs and how they can apply some systemic advocacy to ensure that those are protected through the changes coming in the Medicaid landscape. There's just always something to be aware of that's going on. And I think that really harnessing all of those stories together presents a really strong case for what our network is able to do.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So I've been told that maybe you have a Hill Day or appropriations pun and or joke.
I always have a joke.
Okay.
You know this.
Okay, so.
Oh my goodness.
Let's get a drum roll.
Yes. All right, so it's more of a question for Eric. Are you ready?
No, we did not test this out beforehand.
Sorry. Okay. How would you describe the appropriations process?
How?
It's fun.
So much fun.
So much fun.
So much fun.
Oh my goodness.
Incredible.
But yes, that is my joke of the month. I'll be here next month, assuming that I'm not kicked off the podcast yet. Sorry, Michelle, you weren't here for the joke, but I'm sure you're actually laughing, even though you pretend you don't like them.
Michelle is groaning from afar.
Yes.
Yes.
She's
Stephanie's
like,
puns get us through the day.
Yes, they do. See, I knew there was a. Yep, there we go.
You gotta laugh. You gotta laugh.
Yes, exactly. Like, laughing is the best form of, self-care when it comes to this kind of work. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So it's important to remember that congressional budgets and federal decision-making say a lot about whose rights are protected and whose are not, what voices are included, what voices are not. And I'm very grateful that I got the chance today to sit down with two of my amazing coworkers and hear more of their voices, get to share more about the amazing work that they do for our larger community. This has been National Disability Radio, where we highlight issues that impact people with disabilities. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and continue the conversation at NDRN.org or anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. Thanks for listening. Until next time, let's keep working together to create a world where people with disabilities can thrive.
Bye.